Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Disc Guidance segment with the 2MK team. Today we are bringing you our Roa bot, which is the first that we are creating for this game, and is basically meant for beginners in order to help them understand and get used to dealing with the shield mechanic. As always, the purpose of bots is to give you an opponent against whom you will generally know their options, though please note that we do try to expand this fairly often. If you're not familiar with how our bots work, particularly the ones for Under Night in Birth, if you're not familiar with that game, then there will be some extra information that you'll need to pay attention to. I'll try to keep the stream short tonight, but because of that additional information and some other little bits of variance that need to be put in for this bot, I can't guarantee it. Generally though, we're going to be looking first at what the bot is meant to do and why it's built the way it is. Then what exactly one needs to input to get it to work. And then move on to specific things that you should use it for outside of just the very basics, and why you would want to use this bot in particular. Because it is a Melty/Unist style bot, it also gives you specific requirements in terms of when you can use it and what you need to put in and so on. So please pay attention to that as well. We will, however, after all of that, reach around the point where we're talking about other aspects of the game and specific ways to help you input bots. So if you're relatively familiar with the gameplay as a whole, you aren't likely to need to watch beyond the point where you get the basic setup part. I'll let you know when that is within the stream, because as mentioned, there is a variant and a reason for the variant being input the way it is. But for now, let's just watch Roa bot function in full form and discuss why it's the way it is. In order for a bot to teach you anything about shielding and how to use your shield, it must do three things. First, it must attack both high and low. Secondly, it must attack from far enough away that you have to care about shielding at maximum range. And thirdly, it must do that. At least somewhere have the capability to do its own counter shield so that you have to care. As this is a Unist/Melty bot style, you unfortunately will not be able to see the inputs on the side of the screen that Roa is on, and you're going to have to more or less take my word for them. But as you can see, he's generally repetitive. Not so repetitive that you can't end up facing a real problem, but he's repetitive enough. He's, however, not generally repetitive in the way that leads to you just being able to shield and get away with it. He will throw. If you low shield every time, he does have air attacks. He will not use them too often, but he's got them. And he has moves where he has long amounts of movement forward, as well as other tricks he can use to keep himself out of the interactions that follow up on the shield. There's also ways to improve him as a whole, the bot that is, to ensure that he counter shields you even more. But for beginners, this isn't necessarily a good idea. You need to practice actually landing your attacks and so on after the shield itself, before you start thinking about counter shield play and a bunch of other things related to that. He, however, should have every option out of shield himself. And you may not be able to tell when he is using his shield because sometimes he'll just do the thing required so quickly by the very nature of it. It also gets you used to the idea of moves that despite shielding them you have not gained anything. Which comes up fairly often, honestly. There's a good example. Now, as this is not meant to be a strong explanation of how shield itself works, most you'll get out of me right now is explanations of what is happening and why the bot sets up certain things. As for the question of the variant options, simply put, if your character is a footsies style character, who tends to hang out in neutral and do specific things to keep control, who doesn't need to approach the enemy basically at all, you will use a different set of inputs, but they will only be different in one very small way, rather two small ways. Two different inputs will need to change, but the way in which they change is fairly predictable and easy to understand. Roa as a character generally is good at keeping you away and using up various options that he has meter-wise to keep himself out of trouble. So you often have a good reason to at least consider shielding when far enough away, and get used to the idea that if you do this, you sometimes just won't be able to solve the problem. He will do something like that if you stand shield, and he will similarly find different things he can do if you don't, and you crouch shield. So, as mentioned, we'll go through the concept of shield a little bit for those who aren't familiar, or don't see how to use the bot for that purpose in a bit. But unfortunately, because it is this type of bot, we're going to have to go through some information you need to understand about these bots in general. Recording bots in this game is pretty much the same as in other games. There is a dummy option, and you can use the various dummy slots. They give you 5, and we use the 5 just as we do in our other Street Fighter and other bots. Once it is set to repeat in intervals, and secondarily random dummy playback on, you'll be able to get the full bot experience. But if we turn random dummy playback off, we can at least look at them, even though we can't necessarily see the inputs themselves. As mentioned, this bot is intended to be very simple to input, so in this case we have Action 1, which is actually in this case the first variant. You just hit stand A to crouch A quickly, and then a quarter circle back. And this is what you should see most of the time. The quarter circle back function is not with the button. If you're not familiar with the edge shift idea, it is simply that when you end a bot's input with a quarter circle direction or something that the game treats as a special move input, when it replays into itself or into another, it will use the first input of that and complete the move. In this case, therefore, he's doing a quarter circle back plus A. Later on in the stream, we'll explain how exactly to get this done, because there is a requirement to it, But the short version is that when you press Start Dummy Recording, you can simply hold the button required and it will treat it as having been input. Again, this will be demonstrated specifically later. Therefore, for now, just understand that when you are trying to make sure that the thing is input as the first input for getting things like special moves, you will usually need to do this. And similarly, if I change to any of the other dummy actions, you will see them just replay into themselves. Since I currently have random off, once random is back on, the standard thing happens. It combines them one at a time, and you get different options. Therefore, let's talk about meters and goals. Since this game is, again, like Unist, and you are unable to change the auto recovery of the life gauge individually, in other words, you can't put yours to fall while the opponent's does not. At the moment, we suggest leaving auto recovery off for training with this bot. Even if you are fairly good at your combos, the combo scaling in this game usually means that you are not able to do extremely high damage. And you can therefore mostly watch and check your performance based on how well you actually do the things. You can, however, give yourself handicaps in life gauge if you want, but if you don't want to take any breaks between at all, then don't worry about it. The magic circuit can be set to default or auto increase, but that combines with the aforementioned. If you are going to put magic circuit value up to 200% for Roa, for example, and have auto recovery off, then what you'll end up seeing is the interaction where once the match ends, relatively speaking, where enough damage has been done to one character, Roa will start with full meter, which is kind of useful. This can be particularly helpful as a method to get the handicap in question, because giving auto increase is a little problematic in certain ways, but it's better to have Roa have some advantage over you. So you can consider this as a main option you have. You take a little break here, it restarts, you have no meter, Roa has full meter, and now you just do what you're supposed to do. And therefore, talking about what you're supposed to do, as mentioned, shield him and hit him back when you shield. Depending on your character, this will be easier or harder, but really you're just here to learn the specifics of the mechanic. If you press A, you will do the launcher style one. If you press C, you will also do the launcher. I didn't press C then, but I could have. And if you press B, you will do a teleport style thing. There is also the option, when you have Moon Gauge available, to press B plus C and do a flying forward style move, which helps depending on the position of your opponent and your understanding of how to combo out of it. This is one of the more important things actually to learn to do, as there are many more situations where it helps you. Similarly, if you shield for too long, depending on what Roa does, you will get beaten. And if you take too long to do the move from the shield, similar things happen. It is in fact part of the bot to practice your combos from the shield position. You win. We gave the character the instant air dash, and if you learn enough of how to deal with the various other things he does, you will also need to anti-air him at certain points, usually with your 3C. Depending on how well you input certain things, you need to deal with him doing certain other things, but in general he will not go very high off the ground for most input people. Therefore you are really looking for one of the fastest anti-airs possible. That said, this is going to come up a lot in this game no matter what you do, so you might as well learn it. Beyond that, you are generally trying to tech the throw when he does actually try to throw you, which shouldn't be very often. It will be very difficult to be sure that Roa is going to throw you. That is one of the things that bots are best at, specifically being unpredictable enough that really large obvious things aren't signaled to you outright. And finally, for most characters that have any of these, you will often be trying to get close enough to use one of your moves that has clash frames, and seeing how those clash frames interact with certain things, like that. Often you will also need to try to get your combo off. In general, you are aiming to hit with the max range of your clash frame move, but it does depend on the character somewhat. This will change depending on the amount of clash frames your character has as well. But because Roa is a good character to teach you this in the first place, just understanding what you can and cannot do, when you will and won't get hit out of that move, and often by what, can be helpful. Of course, you're not necessarily going to get too much out of it if you just match it, so it's better to use it when you think you're not going to get close in general, and that is going to also be affected by the variant input. That is almost a free moment for that, because you do have to learn exactly when after the B teleport style of shield you can actually use that style of move. If you press the button too early to start it, you will actually get nothing at all, and you won't be able to notice that until a little bit later on. So it's very important to learn explicitly when this should be used for you. Usually he won't be too dangerous in terms of how much damage he does, but there are definitely going to be times where you'll just get explosively comboed. Both because it's that type of game, and because the bot is partially built to do this. You should in fact feel free to use your blood heat to get you back health if you are losing out against it. After all, he's going to use his meter to take away your health. You might as well use yours to get it back if that's what you think is going to work. And while you should probably not do follow-ups to all your combos, doing the combos themselves isn't necessarily bad. And of course, that specific type of move is going to be important as well. But it's specifically because it's so relatively easy to hit out of shield that if you are treating it as the style of bot that has a point system, you're going to have to be a little bit more specific than that once you've got the hang of it. Or you're going to have to make him harder in some way. Fortunately, he manages pretty well anyway. If he's close enough, you should shield into A or C to get the launcher, and that does some amount of damage but not terribly large. And if he's too far away, you should do something else. But as that move demonstrates, sometimes it really doesn't matter what you do so much as when you do it. And this will also be important for your timing. One methodology is to do that, of course, just remain shielding longer. In order to remain shielding longer, you don't actually have to keep on holding shield either. All you have to do to keep shielding instead of counterattacking is not actually hit another button. So if, for whatever reason, you're used to letting go of shield because you want to do something else, you don't really need to manage to keep yourself making sure that you hold shield in order to have that move style get defeated. It's explicitly that you need to not hit anything else, which is a little bit easier than explicitly holding shield the entire time. Similarly, he's also demonstrating that there are types of moves where you're not necessarily going to gain a lot from shielding unless you hit the A counter, and in some cases, some characters have deceptive moves that will prevent even the A or C counter from working similarly. Those, for example, weren't really throw attacks. Those were expecting a throw, for whatever reason, and hitting the button to throw myself, which isn't really the same. However, if you want to count them, just understand that your opponent will take advantage of them if you're trying to learn how to do this sort of thing as a generality. Now let's quickly go into both the inputs themselves and changing them because we need to do the variant. In this case, we're going back to character select and switching character to input with a new one. I'm going to keep on picking this stage because it's the best music for the purposes of the stream. And we haven't figured out to make it and do anything different yet. While Koma is not really the type of character for whom this variant is useful, I actually wanted to demonstrate that fact, that it's not as useful when you do it with this character. Right now, if you're moving around with Koma, you have the aim to eventually get in, and Roa will be doing various things to keep you from doing so. But there is another way to input this bot as a whole. And it technically works a little bit better because you can use a different setting for meters. So we're going to go ahead and actually change those things, and while I'm doing so I will change the health back to recover automatically. After this explanation, if you are more or less clear on what's going on, that's probably the end of the parts of the stream that you have any interest in. So, to explain what is in now in full detail then. This is stand A, 2 crouch A, quarter circle back, and then end the recording instantly. Basically hit the options button if you are using a PlayStation, or whatever button will end the recording, as the button as if you were trying to do a special move with a quarter circle forward, or in this case a quarter circle back. When inputting the variant later, it will just be a quarter circle forward instead of back. The action 2 is a little bit more complicated. This one is a back A plus B, and in order for that to happen, one would set one's buttons such that X in this case is A plus B, so that you could, when starting the recording, hold the X, quickly press back. Trying to press them together is not so great, but you have a few frames of difference between them, where you just hold X, press back really quickly, and then he will do a backdash. This will be followed by A plus D, which can also be just back A plus D, so you don't need to let go of anything or change any directions too much. And it doesn't necessarily matter too much whether or not it is down back A plus D, for example. For a few characters this matters, but it only really matters because you want him to occasionally shield just in neutral, but not a lot. There are other bots where that's going to come up. We are developing those for later. So you could change this button to whatever you consider easiest to hit after holding X for a moment, and then a quarter circle forward. Technically it can be a half circle forward as well, since you were pressing back already. For his action 3, you will only need to set it to the C button. This is a relatively simple input. It's just tap C once to do the kick, wait for the kick to complete animating, or almost complete animating, and then press forward C to combo in precisely that way. At around the point where the leg connects on the forward C, end the recording. That will allow it to move in such a way that he moves forward to sometimes do the second part of it, that little low kick you see, which is in fact actually a low. Try not to delay too much in there, but while you are waiting for the 5C to animate, you could press some other directions such as back. You can also try to fit a D in there, I believe, but it doesn't always work because of the way certain moves cancel themselves, and technically, most of the time you don't want to do that. It's more of an advanced thing and tends to make him predictable in a different way at another time. His action 4 is the hardest to do hands down, because in order to do this one, you do not actually press the button at the very beginning, though it does tend to help to still set X to the same button you're going to have to press immediately. This is the one case where you don't hold X, you just need to tap it to start the recording and then very quickly do the whole recording. The recording in this case being a 9A plus B, so that you do an instant air dash, followed by quickly pressing A plus D, and then B plus C. This is really fast. Just tap the 3 buttons. You don't have to let go of the 9 either at any point of it. Just rapidly tap those 3 buttons and then hit options or whatever else will end the recording, and you'll be done. But as a concept of how quick this needs to be, I'm not even going to re-record it now, but when Rowa does do an air dash, you are about to see, he crouches for just like 2 frames. You will know it's done really well when you have managed to catch him in that crouching position after. Generally, you won't get to see him do much else. If you press them fast enough, he won't actually do the throw or the air throw very often at all, because you'll have put in the air throw input long before he actually got that far. He's not far enough into the air dash to actually do an air throw, he's still just starting it up. As you can see, this move, when it plays into itself, can in fact be really dangerous, because some of the stuff, if you've done it at that timing, he won't actually air dash again. He'll do combos, and it will generally increase the complexity and danger of the bot quite a lot. Which brings us to the most important part of all of these bots. They'll work for as long as your game is on. Whenever you turn on the game anew, and by that we mean load up Melty Blood, you must input them again, which is why we strive to make them as simple as possible. His action 5 is straight down to B plus C again. So basically 2B plus C twice, followed by a quarter circle back. It can also be a quarter circle forward, and that partially is the variant in question. So you can work out which of these works best for you, and we'll get into why they're different and what it means in a bit. Mostly you can think of it as whether or not you can whiff punish certain things, and how you react to seeing other things happen. But once again, these bots will only last as long as you have the game on. If you're using a PlayStation, for example, you could turn the PlayStation itself off entirely without closing Melty Blood, even if you are at the main menu of Melty Blood, and the bot will remain. One other thing it allows you to do that is absolutely not clear is that it allows you to change character outright. So for example, I can do this, and the bot and all of its inputs will be transferred over. Whether or not this is useful for the character in question is something we will probably put on the page for each one individually. There are cases where you can use one bot for another character pretty well. And then of course there are other cases where it is terrible and does nothing for you. For example, in future, you will probably see our CL bot share a lot with Saber, to the point where you only have to change one input to change between them usually. But this is nothing compared to our Saber bot that is currently in development. It's not useful basically at all here. And unfortunately, because of the way Rowa's moves work, there are only 3 characters where it even currently seems like a decent idea to use this bot in the same space. This is because Rowa has no down-down moves, and his moon skills are really not used very often in the bot, which comes up a lot. Vlov does not work terribly well because Vlov tends to end up wasting a lot of time in spacings. Also, different things about Lov's rhythm mean that it gets kind of boring and not terribly effective. You'd expect him to throw more projectiles or something, but he really doesn't. Miyako doesn't work either. As she often leaves herself way too vulnerable for no reason. And of course her combos don't work terribly well because she's not a long-range character in the first place. The maids are too relatively complicated for this to work in long term. But you can usually try something because maids have complex moves and don't care as much. That said, just messing around in neutral isn't a great option for them, so... or at least for you training with them, rather. So in the end it comes down to basically Roa and Red Archway. Now, we are not specifically trying to say you can use this to get something good out of fighting Red Archway at the same level of usual fighting of bots. We're more explicitly saying, if you happen to need to check out how this character works or learn any specific things, this might be a quick way to get this information. The other one I'm not showing now because Shiki doesn't work until you have the variant on. So let's put that in and proceed forward. As I mentioned, the only thing you need to do to get the variant is to switch around input 1 and input 5, the ending, the direction that the quarter circle goes. And you can do it on any character, so I'm just going to do it on Red Archway and go back to Roa afterward. What you can't see, of course, because you can't see my hands, is that I'm about to hold the X button. Assuming I set those buttons right in the first place. Yes. I'm about to hold the X button long enough for this to start, and you will be able to see her do her stand A. It's very quick. Then 2 crouch A and a quarter circle forward. Okay, so you won't be able to see it unless I do this, but if you're familiar with what her quarter circle forward A looks like, you can understand that I have managed to make this move happen. Because of the speed of that input and some other interactions, it's possible, provided the character has certain input styles, to end up with being able to do their super move, their art drive. So we're going to return to Roa now. let me do this from character select. And we're now at the point where we can actually change stage. There's nothing in particular one needs to do in order to make this work. If you are just moving around, you're doing something else in some other method, it seems that it will just always hold. So you could, unlike some games, go into matches and then use training mode and the bot should still be there. So a quick adjustment of buttons and also turning back on the randomization of behavior. In this form, you can both recover health and leave the magic circuit recovering naturally. And once again, to be clear, if you are familiar with how these styles of bot work from Under Night or just Fields, if you understood all of that, we're now basically moving into the part of the stream where there's not a lot that you need to hang around for. Hopefully, we won't take too much longer to close it out at all. But let's talk about why variants are the way they are. And why it doesn't necessarily work all that well for Coma, for example. This sort of situation results with Roa basically tapping down quickly twice, doing 2A quickly twice, which is a tell but isn't always there, and then, as soon as he's done that, doing A move. If your character is a character that tries to get in really often, him using the lightning to zone you at that point is a useful enough thing. But if you have a lot of armor or any other specific method, it's slightly more useful for Roa to move, especially if you tend to come in from the air. And remember, of course, that while he generally will do things, he doesn't have to do things. He can, in fact, in at least one case, input something that does not result in him immediately doing his forward lightning rush. But Coma mostly just doesn't care. Coma moves into these positions on purpose. And while more damage is often taken, you won't necessarily get as much out of it either, because most Roa players, since the bot is at least somewhat meant to help you with that as well, aren't likely to just do this randomly in neutral. Similarly, the action 5, which involves the crouching, let's call it crouching C in this case, is technically one that could also be followed by either lightning or the rush. If your character is good enough at punishing the lightning at that point, you might not want that to be what's there. There is in fact one more option, and that is to use 3B plus C in specific situations. But because of the way we've been testing, we've noted that this is probably not the best plan. Simply because the character will do the uppercut far more often than we want him to. Now he does have it in there, and he does use it in the air often enough to be helpful. Maybe not on today's variations of the inputs, but he often does. And you'll definitely get to see this because, again, every time you turn this on and then switch off and to come back, you still have to input it all again. But mainly, the way this character interacts with Kuma, for example, it would technically be better to have kept the tendency to just do the zoning attack in neutral more often. Whereas, as you've just seen, when you happen to do the crouching C and follow it by lightning, there are lots of ways through there. You can mess with it a lot. In fact, even if you are considering the fact that you are using the bot with what's called a point system, generally we should have just enough information on our website to tell you if you've changed it in this way, this is what you should be considering relative to point systems, what needs to be different. Generally though, you're aiming to get it to suit your own purposes. Whatever you think is important to practice in whatever way, go with that. Some characters are capable of relatively easily punishing his crouching C, and therefore it's not usually a good idea to put the standard lightning after it. But if you're the sort of person who tends to block when you see a button like that instead of trying to hit it, or you just don't hit as many buttons in neutral in general, you might be in a better position to just get hit by lightning. The useful thing about this style of the input though is, as mentioned, if he has enough meter, he'll do different things. And depending on how you set it up, you may be able to get him to just do his super, his art drive, and learn how to defend against that in various ways. But it's not really that necessary, so it may not come up today. But to close out, we'll therefore go into one more setting of the variant, and more importantly, demonstrate why it's specifically set up that way. So as mentioned, this can be changed, and I'll go ahead and demonstrate how it's recorded as well. Change C to X, and currently the shield is circle, and let's re-record our action 3. Because I also wanted to show off approximately when you'd want that recording to end. Now he should have an additional shield in there. And for some simplicity, I will once again redo action 5. Since this is the only button you actually hit during action 5, we will set B plus C to X, and record this way. Note that that is Roa's 3C. And if you do 2 into 3, different things seem to happen. So be careful with that. This is only not working because he has no moon meter at that point. So you can try this one this way, with the quarter circle forward. But if you mess up the timing at all, in terms of when you release the button or when you do it, he will end up doing a move and you don't generally want him to. So I've now changed that to a quarter circle forward and put the extra shield in. And we're going to change characters once again. And of course there will be some changing of buttons when this happens. Mainly because I set them wrong just now. Any stage is fine since we are past that point of stream, so we expect this bot to be available in full on our website 2-mk.org around 7 PM Eastern on Sunday, assuming no serious delays. So, one button fix. And that should be right. Now bearing in mind again that the issues here are relative to clash frames, and CL has slightly less clash frames than most characters. Slightly less clash frames than the characters we're used to anyway. With that one change to a quarter circle forward as well, you will get the option for him to just do his art drive because it's so quick. But you'll notice there's basically no lightning. In order to get the lightning back, you would have to change the way he does things with his action 1 to once again move the quarter circle back for that purpose. Generally, it's good to have at least one of them to actually be lightning thrown. But in different situations he will still do it, regardless of any of that, simply because of the way the game works. He can change sides in such a way that will cause him to do the move. Other behaviors will cause it as well. The additional shield input, which was done as 4D 4-4 shield, I guess, will still help, but as I said, it sometimes can make him a little more predictable than you'd want. In general, you should not set the moon meter or the moon gauge of either character to regenerate automatically. Just leave the moon icon in its regular state, because it's going to be very important for learning rhythms and understanding when you should and should not do certain things. So as you can see, he will tend to, let's say, overdo it. But it's very easy to change that now because of where we are, so let's do one more change to the action 1, and that will clarify it all. We're going to put it back to that throwing lightning because CL tends to stand farther away, and because she stands further away, she can't necessarily react to something as simple as I've just hit crouch A twice and still make sure to avoid lightning. We can easily check, did that work? Yes, lightning is thrown at least once. This will also reduce the time he has to do the actual art drive, because there will be less situations in which that interaction plays into itself. But there will still be a fairly large number of them, so you should watch out for that. Depending on how fast you manage your inputs, it will allow you to do more or less of this move. But it's not critical to the bot at all, it's just an interesting thing to have him do fairly often, simply because it will teach you how to deal with it. What you do tend to get, once those are clearly done, is, as just demonstrated, at least some uppercuts. This bot is also good for basically teaching you bot theory, in case you did not understand and wanted to think up some for yourself, figure out how to do this as a generality, and so on. This is a good way to learn that. Since this is a good bot for messing around with, to make sure that he's doing what you think is a good idea. If you face any Roa online, you may not be able to replicate what exactly it is they did or what they thought was a good idea, but he should generally have about enough of his main options in here that you might not be too surprised, and should be able to find the correct thing to change so that you get what you want. And of course, now that he's been optimized into the second variant, you can take a look at the final character that you can also use this for, one that is, again, absolutely not for the purposes of this is the bot for this character, but he does come up often online, especially now, and I don't think that's likely to change. We have finally seen the information that will be in the balance patch next time around, and we're going to care a lot. Here, as mentioned, is the advanced version, and that is a thing that will happen. Once you've gotten shielding down, adding that last shield input within Action 3 can definitely make your life more complicated. But before that, you might not want to jump to it immediately. So to close out, we're going to change characters one more time. We won't bother going back to character select from here, just go straight to change to Shiki as instead of Roa. And you'll see something that sort of works. Fortunately, while it is not a Shiki bot, it does have more or less the same option choices. In terms of what you should be doing, with one difference, mainly that you want to stay off the ground or do a quick leaping forward attack to deal with certain things he does. And that's just how you should deal with Shiki in general. So it's a quick way to learn something about how to deal with this character. Try not to spend too much time on the ground if you don't need to. Explicitly, try to move forward in the air when you think he's coming for you, and stay on the ground only when you think he's playing defense. While he does hit high, he doesn't combo well, especially at mid-levels of play when he hits high, and it generally requires a lot more skill from the player at minimum, so you're at least stressing them out more. This is again a place where you leave the meter to regenerate automatically, so that he can do that. And if you want, you can even turn on his awakening. We're not doing that right now. because he doesn't have the same sort of zoning style moves, but can do good low attacks and stress you out. It's also good to think about whether or not you'll benefit from really jumping quite short or just doing neutral jumps in specific positions to get your damage on him then. You can use it to learn when a neutral jump is likely to be safe, and more importantly, not when it's safe, but when you won't take much damage for having done it. He even has enough startup on some of the things he does that if you neutral jump and you think he's going to hit you and you quickly air shield, you actually get away with it. What you should actually do after the air shield, I can't really tell you. For various reasons, his rhythm results in him doing much less throws, so he's not good for practicing that particularly. Especially if you let him regenerate meter. So again, this isn't a great cheeky bot because he does too many things that leave him open and just moves too much, you could say. But in terms of learning, can I just counter someone spamming moves? This one works out for him. There's a throw finally. But as his rhythm is absolutely not optimized for this purpose, it's not necessarily worth your time. If you put this one in, if you try to change Shishizu while using the original variant, it will technically be worse, and practically not worth your time at all unless you play a really long range character. So a lot of players can try it. Red Arcade players might want to try it. And as that's generally the one they'll be using anyway, go for it. But that brings us to the end of this Guidance stream. Once again, you can find the information on this on our website 2-mk.org on Sunday around 7 Eastern. And if you just want to get used to the idea overall, you can check out our Under Night bots. In this case it's still marked as Unist bots on our site in general. And we don't really have any that are very similar to this one for you to try, so you're going to have to come back and get the inputs from the stream itself still. But if you feel as if you've missed most of the explanations or don't understand something about the way that the recording system works, those bots do have the exact same system. Basically, it's just this game is just Under Night but with multiplayer characters. At least in terms of underlying mechanics and options you can usually use in training mode. So, since that's often what you'll need as your explanation, you have at least one point of reference even before any of our melty bots are available. Our content in general will be available on this channel, and our announcements about new bots or just new things we are streaming on our Twitter 2_MK_FGC. But that covers it for the Smooth Criminal, this guidance. This has been really Brilliant for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.